Welcome everyone. Glad to see we're all alive and surviving, just about. So I am going to, I'll mute you for now with the sound, and then I'll unmute you when I get on to the demo part so that you can ask questions and whatnot. So let's do that now. You can unmute yourself if you've got something to say, but I'll unmute you all when we get on to the demo part. So let me do the screen share. I'm going to be flip-flopping back and forth with lots of different things today. And you should all now be seeing the slideshow. So what we are going to be talking about, oh, just a reminder on dates. This Friday is for the Symmetry project, and the 5th of June is for the photo editing challenge. Some of the pictures coming in from you guys are amazing, so that's going to be real fun to publish those, and you'll get to see them all. That's going to be good. So what's today's topic? Well, someone mentioned this on one of the calls, and I thought, well, let's have a go. It's not something I do a great deal of, bracketing and or HDR, but we did touch on it the other day when I mentioned that sometimes I take a picture exposed for what I'm taking the picture of, but then I take another picture as quickly as possible afterwards of the sky, so that I've got the sky correctly exposed and the subject matter correctly exposed in 2 images. And then if it's appropriate, I'll combine them to make one better image. And that's really an example of bracketing and kind of HDR. And what these two are linked, which is why I've put them together. And what it's all about is that first sentence there. What you're trying to do is you're trying to capture more data than you can capture in one photo. By taking multiple photos, all of different exposures, you're capturing more data. So a quick example is if you take a picture and it's grossly overexposed, you're burning out your whites. So you're losing data in the whites. So all the subtle shades of brightness and grey in those areas will be completely blown out, and you've lost the data. So, and you did that maybe because you wanted to pick the foreground, you want to get the foregrounds correctly exposed, but in doing so, you blew out the sky because it was so bright. So by taking 2 pictures like that, you can take an exposure correctly for both, and then you're expanding the dynamic range of the picture. And what I mean by dynamic range is how much from complete black to complete white, how much you can have in one image that's correctly exposed. And that's what HDR stands for, high dynamic range. And all it means is just expanding the amount of range you've got between black and white. Our eyes do it without us thinking. Our eyes are amazing, and our brain is amazing at processing the images that our eyes are sending it. We don't notice this, but our brains have extremely wide dynamic range. The camera is much less able to deal with that. Now, obviously, as cameras get more modern, sensors get better. Some cameras are now including a bit of artificial intelligence in them to deal with these things. A lot of phone cameras now are getting very good at this kind of stuff and automating it. But sometimes you have to step in, and that's really why it's worth understanding what's going on here. A lot of more modern phone cameras now do bracketing automatically. They just start shooting. As soon as you open the camera app on them, they're shooting. And then when you actually decide to press the button, it gives you, well, I captured all these images before you press the button, and I captured all these images after you press the button. I can combine them for you, or you can choose which one you want. So your cameras are beginning to do this automatically, but it's worth understanding what's going on under the covers. And where you would use it is, as I described, where you've got very high contrast scenes. Sometimes where you've got an image that you've not exposed correctly, and here I'm meaning more underexposed than over. Overexposed, if you're burning stuff out, you're losing data, you're probably not going to recover it very well. But if it's underexposed, you can recover it with the sliders in the software that you're using, boost the exposure, increase the contrast. Sometimes you can get it back with that. Sometimes you can use a little bit of HDR processing to do that for you. And if you want to, you can use some of these techniques to go really nuts creatively and oversaturate colors, over-enhance the boundaries between shapes. So where the software will look at the image and where it sees a boundary, maybe the edge of a face or the side of a building, it sees a boundary between one scene and the next, recognizes that as a boundary and will over-process the boundary so that it makes it stand out more. And you'll see a little bit of that in a minute. And I found one very good example here, and that is where you're trying to take a picture of these people and you've got a really nice, interesting background image. But if you take it, exposing it for the building in the background, the people are underexposed. If you turn the flash on, the flash saturates the foreground, but you lose the background. If you can actually HDR process or bracket these two pictures, so take the two top pictures and combine them digitally, you get the best of both worlds. Yeah? So that's a good illustration of the kind of things that one can do with these techniques. Now, you may not always recover a bad photo. If it's a bad photo, it's a bad photo, but you might. And some of the other editing techniques that we've covered over the last few weeks also come into play. You can do cutouts, layers, masks, all these things are still valid. Here's another way of making an omelette. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll flip to some software and we'll take a look at what we're doing. Firstly, I'm going to flip to Lightroom. I can find it in my list. Here it is. And I'll unmute you all now so you can ask your questions if you want to. If it gets too noisy, I might unmute you again. Hang on, I want to unmute you.
Ray, I think the upgrade to Zoom doesn't let you do that anymore. I think we have to unmute ourselves.
Is that so?
Yeah, because that's what we're finding as instructors.
Oh, right. Oh, well, if you want to unmute yourself, you've got a question to ask, you can unmute yourself then. Okay. If you haven't got anything to say, it's good to stay muted, and then that just helps reduce all the background noise for everyone. But okay, you've got control to unmute yourself if you want to. So now it's been pointed out to me, and it's a very valid point, that over the last few weeks, I really just focused on Lightroom and Photoshop. And not all of you have those products. Some of you have got Photoshop elements, and some of you have got other stuff. And what we'll do in future sessions is perhaps we'll get some elements going and show you how to do things in Photoshop elements. Now, it's fair that some time ago the club was pushing Photoshop elements in that we wanted to standardize everyone as much as possible on the same software so that when we ran the training courses, everyone was using the same stuff and therefore the training was a lot easier. But things have changed since then, and now with the new licensing that Adobe are doing, they're clearly pushing everyone towards Lightroom and Photoshop proper, and that's why, you know, I've been focusing on that more recently. But equally, you know, people out there who are still going to use elements, and there's no reason why you shouldn't, then we'll try and cover some of those things too. Although interestingly, today I tried to look up elements on the Adobe website, and boy, have they buried it. They really don't want you. They want you using the Lightroom and Photoshop combination. So it's all there, but you've really got to dig to get to the element stuff. But anyway, so this is Lightroom. And again, you know, what I'm describing to you, you can do in Elements and the other products. It's just the way you get to them is slightly different. And what I will do in a moment is I'll show you the Adobe web page as to where you can find this stuff in Elements. I don't have Elements installed on my equipment, so I can't actually show you the software itself. So here we've got some photos, and we got 2 groups of 5, and these were kindly donated by Carol Orme. And as you know, she does quite a lot of HDR photos, or has done in the past. And I asked her if she wouldn't mind sharing some of her pictures, because as you see here, there's a group of 5 pictures, and they all look slightly different. And that's because she's been doing bracketing. And if we look at these pictures, if you look at the metadata on the side here, you might need to get rid of all the thumbnails of the videos and the participant list or the chat window to see this. But if you look round about here, do you see the exposure number? It says that it's a 1, it's a bit difficult to read even for me, so 1/60th of a second at f9. Let's look at the next picture. That is an 80th of a second at f9. This one is 1/640th of a second at f9. 1/320th of a second at f9. And 1/1250th of a second at f9. So what Carol has done here is she's changed the shutter speed to change the exposure on 5 different photos. Now, there's a reason why 5 is often mentioned. And the idea is, and you'll notice when I called out those exposures, they weren't in sequence. Now, if you're thinking logically and in advance and say, I'm going to take this picture and I'm going to bracket, then you might start at -2 stops underexposed and then go to -1 and then go to 0 and then go to +1 stop and then go to +2 stops. But that's if you're thinking rationally and normally. I rarely think rationally and normally, particularly when I'm out with my camera. What tends to happen is I take a picture, I chimp it by looking at the back of the camera on the screen and think, eek, this is a bit of a high contrast picture. I should bracket this. And then I go back and go, right, what was that? All right, we'll call that 0 because that was pretty much well exposed. But then the sky or the foreground was a bit wrong. So what I'll do is I'll call that 0. I'll do a -1 picture, click, -2 picture, click. Now I'll do a +1 picture, and now I'll do a +2. They're all out of sequence. It doesn't matter. And indeed, as you see here, Carol's pictures are showing in time order. You look at the view down here, it says it's in capture time sequence. So she didn't take them in a logical sequence. She took them when she thought she needed to do it. The software doesn't mind, okay? So you don't have to worry about that. But you might be wondering, well, how can I quickly and conveniently change the exposure on the camera? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing that and I'm going to start sharing a webcam. And you should now be seeing my portable camera. Ooh, that's a bit freaky. And I'm doing this so I can show you the back of my camera. And here we are. Here's my camera. Now, how do I change the exposure quick? Well, you've got an exposure compensation switch. And if I look at, do it there, you see this little plus or minus? See that? The little plus and minus button. Now, the other thing to note I'm in aperture priority here. I'm using the A. As Carol did, she changed the shutter speed and kept the aperture constant. That's a good practice. And the reason is that if you change the aperture, you're changing depth of field. And for a composite picture like this, it really starts to make things a bit more interesting if your depth of field is changing too much. So you're better off keeping your aperture constant so your depth of field doesn't change, and then changing shutter speed. And I'll talk about movement and stuff like that later. But as long as your shutter speed is up in a reasonable speed, and Carol's, the slice one of this sequence was an 80th of a second. So for a handheld shot, that's fine. As long as your shutter speed's in a reasonable zone, you're better off sticking to aperture priority and then using this plus or minus button. So what I'm going to do is take a look at the display on the back. Get this right with the lights and everything. You'll notice that it's on f8, and at the moment it's looking at an 1/8 of a second. I'm now holding down that plus minus key, and you see what's happened in the bottom left. The plus minus exposure compensation has lit up. Now I'm going to rotate the wheel. Plus 3.3, plus 0.7, plus 1 stop. Go the other direction, and I can go minus 1 stop. So what I do is I take a picture at 0, I come in here, dial it down to -1, take another picture, dial it down to -2, take another picture, and then rack it back up to +1 and +2. When you do this, take your 5 pictures, put it back to 0. I cannot overemphasize that enough. If you don't remember to put it back to 0, your starting point for every other picture you take is going to be wrong. All right, so make sure you put it back to 0. But if you use that technique, now,
bracket on it.
Say again?
My camera has an automatic bracket. You can select 2, 3, 5, 7.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, if some cameras got automatic bracketing on it, and if you turn that on, it will do it for you. And you go click, you press the shutter 4 or 5 times, however many, yeah?
No.
Yeah, and it will do that adjustment for you. And it normally does it 0, -1, -2, +1, +2 in that sequence. And that's, so you've got 5 pictures all a stop apart. When I was rotating that dial, it was changing it 1/3 of a stop at a time. And that's just a standard thing that most cameras do.
Even with the automatic bracketing, you've got to remember to turn it off.
Yes, yeah, with automatic bracketing, turn it off. Carol, is that how you do it?
No.
How do you do it?
No, I don't set them individually at all. I set it up in a custom mode. So I set up the basic AV, and I don't do the timing whatsoever. I do the bracketing from -2 to +2. And the other settings, yes, AV I usually sort of set at 8, but then as you say, it sort of tends to fluctuate a bit, I suppose. I forget the other settings I use, to be quite honest. As I say, I haven't sort of picked up the camera for a little while now, but there's a sort of series of settings I use. Put it in a custom mode, so say custom 1, I can have up to 3 custom modes. So I can set that up and it remains like that in a static situation. And then if I want to take just AV, I can switch the dial round to AV, so I don't even have to set anything back again. It's set up in a custom mode for all time until I change it. Does that make sense? It's C for custom on my dial. And I've set up these sort of criteria that I want, which really remains static. I don't alter it at all. And I just press the shutter once and it takes a series of 5 shots automatically.
Yeah, I think that's a very sensible way to do it. Because just so everyone understands, AV mode is aperture priority mode on the Canon. What Carol is doing is setting up that bracketing in her custom camera settings. So it's like in addition to having the dial on the top of the camera, aperture priority, shutter priority, you've got custom modes. So she's flipping the switch to that mode to take her bracketed pictures, and then it's very easy just to flip back to one of the other modes, and then you're back to normal again, as it were. So whichever way you, all these things, there's always a dozen ways to do things on photography and software. So you do it the way that makes sense to you. You can also do it manually, and I don't tend to use the exposure compensation control that I've just shown you very often. I tend to use manual. So if I get my 0 point by looking at the camera, I flip to manual, and then I just rotate the aperture, the shutter setting clicks at a time to go up and down the shutter speed. So whichever way you want to do it, it's fine. And if you don't remember to do it quite right, maybe you do +1 and +1 2/3 instead of +2. It's not the end of the world. Obviously, it's better if you can have the gap between each photo constant or consistent, because the software can deal with it more easily. But it's not the end of the world. Yeah, it's not a disaster if you don't do that. And as you'll see in a moment, you don't necessarily have to have 5 photos. So, but 5 or 7, it's got to be an odd number, because you want one in the middle, ideally, at 0. But equally, I'm going to show you in a minute using it on 2 pictures, so I don't have an odd number, and it still works. So, you know, as always, rules are there to be broken.
Yeah, Ray, do you always have to use a tripod?
No, handhold is fine.
No, because I find mine doesn't work that well when I handhold it. Do you,
Well,
do you rearrange the pictures afterwards? You know, crop them or turn them around a little bit to make them a bit more accurate?
Well, what I tend to do is when I'm taking the picture and I know I'm going to be bracketing, I look for a reference point in the image that I can line up with the grid or something in my viewfinder. So I'll say, well, that tree has got to be on the right-hand side. That brick wall has got to be in the bottom left corner. I'd find some reference points in the picture, or it could be a window, whatever it is. And then I try and take every picture as close to those reference points as I can. So there's minimal moving around in the images. And then the software does auto-aligning. So as long as you've been as careful as you can, the software should, within reason, auto-align it.
Okay, I'll check that. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
If you've got the auto bracketing, you can put it into high shutter mode, and it does it in about half a second. It takes all 5 pictures, so you don't move.
Yeah.
Can I say that mine's just a little mirrorless one, so it's automatic. It's just spurts them off 1 to 5 in absolutely no time whatsoever. So I never use a tripod.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to Lightroom and look at those pictures, and let's process them. So I'm going to select all of those 5 pictures that we looked at, and then I'm going to come up to Photo, and then I'm going to look at, can't see it for looking now, Photo Merge, and then HDR. So Photo Merge, HDR. And it says I'm going to auto align. And deghosting is interesting because in these 5 pictures, I haven't shown you, but in these 5 pictures, this car is moving. And one of the problems with processing bracketed images is if you've got movement in the image. This is why I said don't worry too much about shutter speed. You're not going to freeze all the movement anyway. You're taking 5 pictures one after another. You're going to have movement. If there's movement, there's going to be movement. So the shutter speed is less important. So here the car is moving. So I get the choice here of how much deghosting is going to happen. And deghosting means it's going to try and remove any images that are moving. So it'll pick one and try and run with it. So if I just say, do the merge, it's working on that, nearly there. And here we have the image down here. And what it's done there is it's frozen the car, so it's not moving, and it's given me a merged image. Now here I could process it, and I could move stuff around, I could do things that I want to do with it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to those, and I'm going to do it again. So I'm going to delete that picture, because I forgot to tell you about one little feature. And that was, where is it? Where is it? Or maybe it was Photoshop, I saw that. Let me have a look. Yeah, it must have been in Photoshop, but there's not a lot of choice on the processing. It is what it is. But what you can do now is, using the develop tools, you can actually, using the normal develop tools, you can start messing around with the exposure a little bit. You can change the clarity and stuff like that to bring out details. So it does, you know, a reasonable job, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's the best in the world personally, but it's not bad. There is another way of doing it in Lightroom, and that's to use a plugin. So if I select those 5 again, and this time I'm going to export them, and I'm going to export them to a plugin, which is Photomatics Pro. It's going to align, it's going to crop. Are you seeing that dialog box, everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Because I'm going to have to switch to Photomatics Pro in a moment. And automatically re-import it. So now I presume in a moment you're not going to see the pop-up. Can you see Photomatics Pro?
No.
No.
Okay, so I'm going to have to stop the share and start the share again with Photomatics Pro. There it is. Okay, can you see that? Yeah, cool.
Yep.
So now you've got your de-ghosting options, and you see here the car, see how blurred that is because it's moving. So I'm going to do a selective, I can do automatic de-ghosting. It's not really done an awful lot. So I'm going to do a selective de-ghost, and I'm going to
You
just
can't
draw.
see the car.
No, can't see it.
We've got an enlarged picture.
Oh, you can't see it.
No. We can only see half the picture. Go to the left.
Going to the left.
No, left.
No, sorry.
Our left.
That's it.
Can you see
Now
that
we can
now?
see the car. Yep.
Okay, so what I've done is I've drawn a marquee around the car, which is all blurred. And then I'm going to right click it and say, make that the ghosted area, and see if I can't preview the ghosting.
That's it.
You see that?
Yeah.
So it's actually resolved the ghosting. And now I'm going to process it. Does everyone see that okay? Or is it blown off the screen?
No, all we've got is browse and browse. Browse and load.
All you've got is browse and load.
Yeah, I'll drag and drop here.
We seem to have a very enlarged picture of your screen.
Okay, let me see if I can make it smaller. Oh, that's made it bigger.
No, we can see it now.
That,
Can you see that
all
now?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I maximised it, which is kind of counterintuitive. Okay, so I mean, if you look there, you can still see a little smidge of ghosting. So obviously there are things to tweak there. Now, one of the reasons why I'm interested in this plugin is it's got a lot of presets. I mean, there are sliders you can play with over on the left, but you've got a gazillion presets down the right. Yeah, can you see all those?
Yeah.
Loads of presets. So we're on balanced at the moment. I mean, we can go to photographic, natural. These start to get a bit more interesting, painterly, and they get more and more extreme. You can come down to, where's the one I was looking for? There's one called grunge. There it is. Grunge. Grunge.
We're not
2.
seeing any change in the picture.
Huh?
We're not seeing any change in the picture when you're doing that.
You're not sharing his balls. Bring your shared window to the front.
It's like we've got a double image, Ray, because we've got the menu twice on the left-hand side and then the options twice on the right
All right.
other side.
Okay. I don't know what's going on here, guys. Let me try doing that. Does that?
Can I ask, does Photomatics work with Photoshop as well, or is it just Lightroom?
It does and it doesn't. There are newer versions that do, and I've got the old version. But you can use Photomatics on its own as well. You don't have to use it with Lightroom or Photoshop. You can use it just as a standalone HDR processor.
Okay.
What are you seeing now?
Nothing.
Just your browse and load and drag and drop here.
Okay, all right. Then this is not working as well as. All right, what I'll do is I will finish this, and then it goes into Lightroom, and then I think you'll be able to see that.
You've got Chris now and me now.
And you.
Nice dog, Chris.
He's dead, I'm afraid.
Ah,
Died at Easter.
So you should be back to Lightroom now, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, that was less than perfect. What I would do is let me go on to some other pictures. And I talked about only having 2 pictures. So here are 2 pictures that I took, and there's not a lot between them, but there is a little bit more detail in the building in this one, in this area, than there is in this one. So it can be nice to merge those. So again, if I use Lightroom's HDR merge, now there's no movement in this, so I'm going to turn off D Ghost. And merge the image. And it's making subtle changes. These aren't big changes. You can make the big grungy pictures if you want to, but you don't have to. And that's the merged image. It's just a subtle difference from the others, just using 2 pictures. Now, if you're using 5 pictures, you get even more. But if you're using just the one, you can, the couple, you can get something out of it.
Ray?
Yeah.
When you've got 2 images, did I detect that it recropped then?
It aligned them and cropped, yes.
Ah, so it doesn't use A or B image
as the 0 or as the default crop?
No, what it does is a best guess.
Oh, it's in between then.
Yeah, and if you look at these two, there's a little bit between them.
Yeah.
So what it's done is gone kind of halfway, cropped it, zoomed it in a smidge.
Mm. Yeah, I kind of saw that when you flipped, yeah.
Yeah. With Photoshop, we get a similar thing. So you should now be seeing Photoshop.
Yep.
And I'm just going to bring up the same two images. And what I'm doing now is I'm using Bridge to tell Bridge to take those two images and throw them at Photoshop and do an HDR merge on them. You'll see it's cropping there because it's done the alignment. And there we are, it's done that. Now, one of the things I was going to show you is over here. Can you all see the top right corner where the pointer is?
Yep.
Yep.
If you click on there, you get a whole bunch of different effects. And those are the effects I was trying to show you in the plugin. But these are quite good. And actually, I find that some of the HDR processing is really good for monochrome. And I think that probably is nice because it brings out the drama in the sky. But then obviously we're getting blown out on the clock face there.
Looks like a negative.
It does almost, yeah. There's all sorts of different settings you can try. Surrealistic is probably a bit of a grungy one.
With that black and white one, Ray, if you selected the tower, could you alter the colour of it?
See, the monochrome artistic doesn't blow out that clock face.
Yeah.
Whereas if I go with high contrast, it's done, you know, it's
I
split.
mean, could you actually just select that tower and darken it down slightly, or?
Yeah, you might be able to, although it depends. But and you can get into here. You can get into curves and things, and a bit more advanced processing to mess around with that. So you know, I could bring down these bits maybe. Bring them down a bit, just to bring the detail back in that clock face, yeah?
Yeah.
But, you know, there are different subtleties and adjustments that one can make. And that's how you do it in Photoshop. But there's one other thing, I can't show you what I was going to show you because the Photomatics plugin is not displaying properly on Zoom. But basically, the Photomatics plugin, one of the things I like about it, and I have done a number of times now, is you can take a single image and HDR it. And the reason is that if you've got a RAW file, with RAW, you can underexpose a RAW and overexpose a RAW conveniently down to -2 stops and +2 stops. So hey presto, if you take your raw image, process it as is, we call that 0. Now process it 1 stop under, there's your -1. Now 2 stops under, there's your -2, +1, +2. You can create 5 images from a single raw file on the fly using the plugin. And what that means is you don't have any ghosting problems with anything that's moving. If people are in the shot and they're moving, doesn't matter. You're only taking one image. So if you take that image as an HDR, as a raw file, you could then apply HDR processing to that single image. And that can be quite useful if you want to do that to a single image. Now, I was going to do that to one of these images, but I don't know if it's going to... Are you seeing Photoshop at the moment?
Yep.
And you can see that raw processor, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me stop screen sharing that and let me see if I can screen share that. Bear with, let me see what I can do here. If I can get the image. Okay, I'm going to try and share that, see if that will work. So are you seeing a window with a single photo and a next adjust in it?
No, we're just seeing the browse and load, drag and drop.
Okay, all right, let's not kill ourselves here. Oh, I was going to show you that. All right, what I will show you though is I'm going to show you the website for Photoshop Elements.
Just before you change that, you know, you can do that in Photoshop as well with the raw file, make copies and put it in the HDR.
It will do it as a single, will it?
Yep.
All right, let me try that. Let's go back to Photoshop.
Mm.
Are you seeing Photoshop now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep, you got that image from Iceland?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, it's quite a dark image. So using the, where did you find that, Malcolm? Is it a filter?
You've just got to do copies.
Oh, okay, I'm with you. Yeah, of course, of course. Yes, you could, using...
You probably have to set it up earlier because it does take a few minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, what I could do is by loading up here, I can do an exposure 0, an exposure -1, an exposure plus, and all the rest of it. So I can do that and save them out as separate images and then use the HDR processing on that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, what I was going to do was just show you this screen, and this is the Adobe website for guided mode photo merge edits. So for the Elements users amongst you, you need to go into guided mode, and then if you look here, you see we've got a number of different ways of processing with guided mode. Can I have a few of those, Chris? They sound great.
Yeah, the chocolate raisins.
You see this one, photo merge exposure?
Yeah.
If you go to photo merge exposure, that's where I got that image from for the flashes. This is a guided way of doing the equivalent of HDR processing within Photoshop Elements. So if you want to have a go at this using Elements, go to guided mode and then photo merge exposure. And have a play around there. And as you see, there are step-by-step instructions on the Adobe website on how to do that. Sorry, I can't do it for you because I don't have elements, but that's how you do it.
Ray?
Yeah.
I had a thought when you showed that earlier on, that picture, whether some of the problems would have been overcome by using rear curtain flash, so that the flash goes off at the end of the exposure to obviously expose the faces, but you may get a better result with rear curtain flash. It's not probably going to do it completely, but be better than the one top right, I guess.
Yeah, and that, yeah, just for those who may not understand what Paul's referring to, you can change when the flash goes off on your camera. Perhaps not on the mirrorless cameras, I'm not sure, or some of the smaller cameras, but certainly the SLRs, they have a shutter curtain that comes across the sensor. It's a traditional mechanism as was used in film cameras. The mirrorless cameras may not use that same mechanism. Some do, some don't. And certainly compact cameras don't. They use a shutter that's further forward in the lens. But the shutter that's a curtain is right next to the sensor. It's right at the back of the camera. And you can change when the flash goes off. You can say that I want the flash to go off as soon as this curtain starts to move. So it's right at the beginning of the exposure. Or, as Paul was rightly pointing out, you can say I want it to go off at the end of the exposure. And what that might well do is give the sensor time to pick up the light from the dark background, as you see in these examples. And then the flash goes off right at the end, so it lights up the faces. So that may or may not help in this situation, but it's certainly worth trying.
Ray?
Yeah.
So what you actually, the better way is when, with the one where the background is bright and the flash is turned off, the camera would have set the shutter speed to a longer length, and when you turn the flash on, the camera sets itself to the flash speed, the flash sync speed. So what you have to do is manually adjust the speed to match the background exposure so that the flash fires, but then the camera carries on exposing for the longer time to get the background exposed properly.
Yeah, you do it the other way around, don't you? You'd expose for the background first and then the flash goes off at the last minute to get the faces. That's the idea of the rear curtain.
The camera will determine the exposure when you do the half press, so you've got to override that.
Yeah, it's
if you just set the camera to your flash, it doesn't matter whether the curtain fires at the beginning of the flash or the back of the flash. Your shutter speed will still be 200th of a second or whatever your camera's default flash speed is. So you'll still get the same exposure on the background. Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, by the time you start working all the subtleties of that out, probably the moment's gone. So it's probably better to do the two pictures. And that's, it comes back to what I was saying earlier, when I recognize a situation and, when you're looking through the viewfinder, looking at this scene, before the flash goes off, you're going to pretty much know that what the camera's going to do. And so take two pictures.
Unless you've got high-speed flash, it only fires the flash when the shutter is fully open.
Yeah.
And there's only high-speed flash that can travel with the curtain going across the sensor.
Yeah.
Some cameras have some of the DSLRs have a picture mode for nighttime portraits, and they'll do the background exposure automatically for you.
Yeah, and some of the consumer cameras will have nighttime mode, and it's certainly worth experimenting with those. And again, I keep coming back to it, the modern smartphone cameras are getting real clever at this kind of stuff. So if you're not getting the results you want on your main camera, try your mobile. You may get decent results. Yeah. Okay, so that was that. And I think that was mostly what I was going to talk about tonight, in that we've got the ability now to, if you're shooting and you're not sure, I would always urge you to shoot more than you think you need. And it doesn't hurt to bracket. If you're unsure, if it's a very contrasty scene, very bright sky, very dark foreground, or vice versa, if it, you know, as in the people with dark foreground and bright background or whatever, if you're not sure, take multiple exposures, but don't just take multiple exposures without intervening. Tell the camera what you're trying to do. Either turn on auto bracketing or use the exposure compensation wheel just to change the exposure a little bit, either way. And as I said, you know, if you can't figure it out, if it's going to be exactly one stop each way or what, it doesn't really matter. As long as you have a few stops each way to pick the best of the bunch, really. And you may end up, and I've done this, I've seen what the camera wants to make the exposure at, then I've done a bit of bracketing, and come processing, I'm thinking, well, actually, one of the underexposed pictures is about right, and if I boost it a little bit in Lightroom or whatever, I get to where I want to be. So I don't need to go through the HDR processing. I'm just taking one of the exposures I've made and tweaking it. But if you haven't got those exposures in the first place, you don't necessarily have that choice. Now, I'm not suggesting that every photo you take, you should take 5 photos. That would be silly. Although some people do, they're in machine gun mode. I just think if you, as you get more experienced of recognizing these scenes, it doesn't hurt to take a few extra pickies either side of what the camera is recommending, just to give yourself a bit of flexibility. So if you want to turn your audio off and fire away, do so, or just chat amongst yourselves.
Judges don't seem to like HDR.
Huh?
Judges don't seem to like HDR for some reason.
It's very much Marmite. Some people like it, some people hate it. I'm of the camp that it's okay now and again, and very subtly. I just, little hints. I don't always go nuts with it, but there are plenty of people that do, and they love it. And I must admit, you know, some of the pictures I've seen where they've done that treatment, the more surreal stuff, it does add an extra something. The ones I particularly like on that score are the painterly ones. It basically turns the picture more into an oil painting, and that can be quite nice, particularly with some of the landscapes. Anyone else had a go at it? I know Carol has. Anyone else had a go at?
Yeah, I've done some HDR.
Yeah.
I've been using it quite a lot, Ray, with my infrared stuff, actually.
Yes.
In fact, every picture I've been taking recently I've HDR'd, but merging them takes forever because I don't use Lightroom. It takes a while to merge them, so I get them all. I only do 3 though, so I'm going to increase it to 5 and see what happens. I've been doing 3, just merging the 3 into 1 before I do anything else to it, and then I change everything I need to change before importing it properly. So I merge it as the initial raw image, and then I end up with a HDR raw image, and then I do all my editing from there.
Okay, well, we'll hear about that when you do your infrared stuff, I hope.
I know, I saw your email.
My wife used to take it.
Hey?
My wife used to take it.
Take what?
You know this is being recorded, Pete.
I'm dyslexic, so...
Moving on.
Ray,
yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead. Can't
This
wait.
picture thingy for next... What?
I can't
This
wait.
picture thingy... What?
Say again.
This picture we're doing this for next week.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you want? What are you... What's your sort of theory?
What, the editing or the symmetry?
The symmetry.
Symmetry. Any picture
Symmetric.
there's some level of symmetry. Either it's a leaf that's
Right, fine.
perfect on both sides, or it's twins facing each other, or whatever turns your
Yeah,
head.
we're going to get a lot of them in lockdown.
I tell you what you could do is take a pair
Fine.
of
That's all I wondered what you said.
try a pair of tips.
Caribou? She won't. You won't want to see them.
They're
But
very
yeah, whatever
Kevin already has seen mine this week.
whatever interpretation you want on that is, you know, whatever symmetry.
So it's a loose interpretation.
Yes, very wide. What and you know, looking at some of the pictures we've had in, there have been quite wide interpretations of it, and that's great.
Yeah, fine. That's all I wanted to know.
Yep. We're talking about bird watching every
Yeah, Paul.
in case there's any misunderstanding going on out there.
Makes me wonder if Peter knows what symmetry is.
Well, I did think it was Thursday this morning. I'm going steer crazy.
That's easy.
Carry on
done,
like
that.
this, making those cracks about your wife, you will end up in the symmetry.
Very good.
So Tony, where are you flying at the moment?
Tony, you're muted.
Ah, that's it. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, where are you?
King's Clear Downs.
I want to know which time zone Kevin's going to take us back to in the TARDIS.
I'm going to the end of coronavirus.
Oh, perfect.
Right.
2030 then.
When's that? 2025?
That looks like I reckon. TARDIS.
That's a pretty good TARDIS. I hadn't noticed it was a TARDIS.
I built it this morning.
Yeah, well done.
With your sonic screwdriver.
It's very symmetrical.
Quick, take a picture.
Does that mean it's even?
You got an MOT on it?
No,
I
it's finished
built a little
for
wooden
6
stand
months.
for my headphones because I got bored.
They can't touch you for it.
Yeah.
Peter would.
All right, guys, if you've got no more questions or no more comments, then I don't want to drag this on longer than it needs to be. So thanks for joining. And,
Very good, Ray.
we'll see you next week when maybe we'll be talking about infrared or maybe not. We'll see.
Fred.
And we'll go from there. And just
Who's in for Fred?
we're doing we're going to start engaging with some external speakers. There was an action on this week. Not done it. Sorry, my bad. But we will see if we can get an external speaker talking soon. So, all right, I will say good night. Ta-ta.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Cheers, Ray.
All right. Okay.